Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Camiotti with Bressler, Amory, and Ross. To my left is Dan Rhoda. We're trying a little bit of a new tact today with things opening up a bit. We were lucky enough to have Dan live in person in our New York office today. So we are doing a joint screen today. I also have with us Harry Carpenter, and I have with us Colin Yost and Connor, excuse me. I think I was getting you confused with Colin Jost, but I haven't seen you with Scarlett Johansson lately, so I think I just it was a Freudian slip. Anyway, I'm head of the cannabis practice here at Bressler, Amory, and Ross, and we thought it would be a good time for to do a little bit of a kickoff of the current markets in New York and New Jersey, about getting your businesses prepared, how you can be involved, and what should you be doing now that these two large markets are coming really online, and what you should be doing to get your business prepared in the various different aspects of the cannabis industry. I'll let the folks on the panel introduce themselves. First, start with Dan, and he can tell you what he does.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Dan Rhoda. I'm co-founder and CEO of Abaca. Abaca is a financial technology company that connects cannabis businesses with financial services like bank accounts, payment processing, and even in some cases, lending and forms of credit. We work with chartered banks across the country, and we're now able to work with plant-touching cannabis operators, that is to say those who are up and running and directly in contact with the plant in about a dozen states. Additionally, we're working with ancillary cannabis businesses and with entrepreneurs aspiring to get into the cannabis industry nationwide.
Harry, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Happy to. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me, everyone. Harry Carpenter with Citron Cooperman. I'm a partner. I am the cannabis practice leader for both the New Jersey office and also co-practice leader firm-wide. We are a top 25 accounting firm nationwide. Most of our offices are up and down the East Coast, from Boston down to Florida. We have 3 offices in California. We're very proud of our practice. We serve everybody in the industry, from several different entrepreneurs and applicants through some of the largest cannabis companies in the country.
And Connor Yost with Opus Consulting. Feel free to confuse me with Colin Jost. I'm totally cool with that. So Opus Consulting used to be called Nucleus One, but we've consolidated under Opus Consulting. Basically, we're a consulting firm that helps companies kind of through, startup and launch of their businesses, basically, licensing, compliance, working with the state, working with municipalities, all the way through hiring employees and then getting the doors open. So that's kind of our core competency.
Great. Thanks, guys. And what we tried to do with putting this panel together was to really give businesses a broad cross-section of, the primary advisors who are going to be helping you in getting your businesses off the ground. A lot of people talk about licensing, and obviously licensing is very important, but if you get a license and you have no idea how to run a business, you're not going to be very successful. And that's going to be a very expensive endeavor. Ultimately, that could lead in failure. Everybody thinks that they can grow the best cannabis, and everybody thinks that they can sell the most cannabis. The reality is it's a very competitive business. It's a very competitive industry, and it takes a lot of hard work and dedication to get your business up and running. The reality is having a trusted team of advisors, having real professionals who have been through business startups and operations are incredibly important in order for you to have a successful business. So what we wanted to do is really give you a flair of some folks who have done it in other markets, some others who, like Harry and myself, who are more predominantly concentrated in New Jersey, where obviously we are a little bit more of a nascent industry. Dan is pretty pretty national. I don't know if you're in every state, but Dan's involved in a number of different areas where there is live, active, either medicinal or adult use markets. And Connor's obviously, he's up in the north in New England, where they've had adult use now going on for a couple of years. So we thought it would make sense to hear from kind of like a best practices for these cannabis company, for your cannabis company, and thinking, okay, it seems like the barrier to entry now is going to be less in New York and New Jersey. What should I be doing? How should I be thinking? How can I be successful once I obtain my license? And yes, there's still going to be some hoops to jump through, but given the recent legislation, it seems like the real keys here are going to be whether you can come to an agreement with other professionals, whether it's landlord, whether it's municipalities, whether it's other people, and that the state is not going to be a barrier to your entry, except for certain things in New Jersey on the large scale cultivation side. So first, I know we were talking before and we were just started to shoot around some funny stories. So I figured for an icebreaker, some what we can and what we can't help with. I was mentioning, when I first got involved with this, let me actually add one thing here because I just saw something popped up on the Q&A. Please, if you have questions, we want this to be interactive. We'll try to get to everything that we can. If you have questions, please try to input them into the Q&A so that we can respond to them. If we do not respond to them and they're in the Q&A, that will give us the ability to at least reach out to you, and there will be a log. If you just throw questions into the chat, they're gone once the session is over, so we won't have that. So please, if you do have questions, throw them in the Q&A, and part of my reach, I will be checking that periodically to make sure that we try to answer any questions that come on. Oh, there it is. We have the mouse. I'll be asking for the Q&A. So anyway, one of the things that I was early on, I was new at being involved in the cannabis industry, and I received a call from somebody, and they mentioned to me, hey, look, what are the current rules? What are the current regulations? And he kept saying, for legal marijuana sales. And I'm like, I'm in New Jersey. The only thing that we have is a really nascent medical program. And he's like, yeah, I need to know all of the rules. I need the packaging to look exactly how it's going to, can you go through my packaging and tell me if it complies with laws? And I'm like, we're in New Jersey, man. There's no adult use. He's like, yeah. Make it look like it's California so that I can be in compliance with all of the California rules and regulations for adult sales. And I was like, but you're in New Jersey. He's like, I know, I'm just going to sell it this way. I said, dude, that's not what lawyers do. We can't tell you how to comply and how to break the law. All we can do is advise you on what the laws are and get you in compliance with how they exist here. So one of the things that we can do is we can keep you within the confines of the regulatory scheme in the market where you are trying to operate. What we can't do is tell you how to bust through that regulatory scheme and get yourself in trouble. That's not the way that we operate here. So I think, Harry, you had some kind of interesting.
I had a similar break the law type question early on, about 5 or 6 years ago when we first formed the practice. My very first lead was somebody who was forming a farm in Jamaica, and they called me. He said, "We need you. We need an accountant. We want to hire you. Help us." And I said, "All right, sounds good." And then I hung up the phone and I called him back and I said, "Wait a minute, how are you going to export the marijuana from Jamaica to the US?" He said, "No, I'm going to export it into legal countries like Germany and Israel." I said, "All right, that's great." Hung up the phone, picked up the phone again. Remember, this is like my first lead in cannabis and I'm just getting my arms around it. I said, "Well, how do you plan to get the money back from Jamaica into the US?" And he said, "Well, I was really hoping you could help me with that." I go, "That's money laundering, buddy." I go, "You're not." I'm like, I'm a CPA and I stay in my lane. I go, "I don't break the law." So it's interesting. I'm sure all four of us have gotten questions that are in that gray area of how can we help and pushing the limits. And I'm not interested in doing those things. When I get to my topics and discussions of how I can help and what businesses should be doing and planning on the financial end, I'll get into a little bit as to what we can help with.
Hey man, you got a really big suitcase. I need you to
exactly. You got one of those fancy airplanes that can fly really low and nobody can see them. Like
All kidding aside, this is really a function of education. We've got an industry, take New Jersey, for example. Cannabis has been purchased, sold, and consumed illegally for the last, 50 or so years. And there are certain habits that are ingrained in the market that certain, let's call them legacy operators, I think that's now the politically correct terminology to use, might have a hard time shaking, but that doesn't mean that there's not a place in the industry for those people who were willing and able to take the risk before it was legal. It just means that we've got an obligation to teach them what is required so they can comply and get into the legal industry. And the place where I often see this pop up, amusingly enough, is in entity names, where there's a big misconception out there, whether you're talking about getting a bank account or for whatever other business objective, where people believe they need to disguise what they do in the cannabis industry, especially hide the fact that they're in the cannabis industry from their bank. I'm here to tell you that's a bad idea. There are already a couple hundred banks and credit unions in the country that will work with you, knowing in full transparency that you're in the cannabis business. But that doesn't mean that you need to name your LLC, Big Bob's Happy House of 420 Fun either. There's probably like a happy medium there. And so, we see some clients that get pretty creative with having nondescript entity names, a group that applied for 6 licenses in one state named them after characters from Game of Thrones, a group applying for a handful in another state named them after different types of pasta, rigatoni, fusilli, etc. And that's okay. You can have a little fun with it and still fly under the radar in certain circumstances without actually fraudulently misrepresenting anything to your financial institution. We've had some that come in with something like pet shop or, I'm not kidding here, blacksmith in the name. That's something that might actually concern us. So, just another one of those areas where I think education is really key. Connor, I imagine you've got a story too.
So I've got a ton of them. I've had people come to me from so many random businesses and places that there's a million of these crazy stories. But I would say, so one of them that actually I think is a little more relevant and a little more recent. So aside from being a consultant, I also have a dispensary that I operate and own in downtown Portland. I'm constantly shocked at the amount of people who try to sell us product from just completely unlicensed operations. They have no understanding of I can only buy from someone who has an adult use license to an adult use license. And it bewilders me every time, the amount of people who don't even have the concept of, having to have a license, and what they're doing is just completely illegal. So I would say, and it seems continuous. So that's also something to be, aware of once you have a license in New Jersey, that vet the people that you may be getting product from and vet them well.
Yeah, and I know in California, a big thing, basically, they had all the they call them trap shops or whatnot. They were the unregulated full blown, I forget the prop number, but I'm not a California attorney, where adult use became legal. The way that they got stock in all the various stores that you would see up and down the medical stores was largely from the Emerald Triangle, and they would come with bags of flour, and they would walk in and they would just sell like that. A lot of people may think that, as the markets go online in the Northeast, that's the same way. Connor, maybe actually this is a good place to jump in, since you kind of touched on that point. You're familiar, obviously, with seed to sale, and how's that work up in Maine?
So actually there's a couple similarities definitely between both. So the two markets that I'm most familiar with, I would say, are Maine and Massachusetts, and both of them obviously a couple years ahead of New Jersey. But I think there's definitely some takeaways from those markets and things that have been learned. And so they both have similar structure where it's you can be vertically integrated or you can not be vertically integrated. And I think obviously it's a benefit to be vertical like that. You can manage your prices and your margins and things like that a little bit better. Doesn't sound like there's going to be that luxury in New Jersey. So since you don't have that, it actually becomes a little bit more straightforward, but also a little tougher, and you have to be running kind of a more efficient operation because your margins are only kind of what they are, right? So if you're a retailer and you're not vertically integrated, all you have is kind of your cogs. And then you have to make sure that however much you can mark that up, that's the only margin you have, and you have to maximize that as much as possible, which is tougher than if you're vertical and you can just kind of manage that all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. So Connor, we'll come back to you in a sec or two. Let's talk kind of fast forward it a little bit into a best practice question. But Harry, since we are talking here, really we'll focus on New Jersey for now, because obviously the New York regs aren't out yet, but I do think these overarching principles apply to both, and I wanted to mention both. But if you're a New Jersey business and you are starting to get into the idea of whether it's a retail operation. Well, let me start with the 6 different classes that we have in Jersey. Try not to forget one. We have your retail license. You have your processing or manufacturing, if you want to make edibles, if you want to do some kind of concentrate. We have your wholesaling. We have your delivery. We have your cultivation, obviously, and then the one that I always forget.
Testing?
No, testing is the 7th asset class. So testing is, you do need an annual license for a testing facility. It was mentioned in the most recent regulations. I'll remember, it was wholesale, delivery, and something else. I can't keep it straight.
Transportation.
Yeah, it's something to do with transportation. It's delivery. Yeah.
It's interesting to see different states decide whether or not something like a testing lab even requires a state law license, or just maybe a clearance and authorization to operate. Their testing labs, there's a whole separate set of standards that chemical laboratories are held to, but that hasn't stopped state regulators across the country from making up their own rules on top of those.
Yeah, and in Jersey, basically, they required you to get your certifications in order to become a testing facility.
And I think that's the best practice. There's already a national standards board for that sort of thing. Why reinvent the wheel?
Exactly. And they really just took that and said, you need to get that accreditation, and then, you have to deal with everybody else. Although what they did do, if you're looking, is they did have certain restrictions, what they put in the most recent regulations to avoid some of the predatory financing that we see in this industry. You can talk about that a little bit more later. But what they did put into the most recent bill was some restrictions so that people, that lenders are not going to be able to come up with what is essentially usurious loans. This industry has been known for years and years and years for some very, very high cost of capital due to the risks that are inherent in the business. So
the risks are real, and the supply of capital really is constrained. So those are some market forces at play, but in certain cases that really become exorbitant. So I definitely think we should get into that in this conversation. But before we do, I think it'd be helpful if we could expand a bit on the lower barriers to entry that you guys have touched upon with respect to these different license types. Are there caps on the number that'll be awarded? What are the initial criteria?
So right now, and then Harry, I'll jump over to you. But since Dan asked one of those, I think at me. I think he's turning this on the head. I love it.
It's for all you guys. You first.
But they're right now, the only thing that the state has said that there's going to be caps on is your large scale cultivators, and they've broken out the large scale cultivators into a number of different sizes, and basically it's pay to play. You want more canopies, you want a larger canopy size, you're going to pay us more money. Makes a reasonable amount of sense. What they have done for New Jersey residents who want to be involved and on the cultivation, who don't want to compete with who obviously can't compete on capital wise, and knowing that there is a cap on the number of cultivators, they've made the micro license available for New Jersey, primarily owned New Jersey owned businesses. Where you can apply for a micro license that limits your size to 2,500 square feet. There's some gray area and some questions there on how that 2,500 square feet is going to apply. Is that going to apply to your mothers? Is that going to apply to clone rooms? Is that going to apply to drying, curing? Right now, the indication is they're saying yes to those questions, which I think is a little bit more challenging. But the reality is, after 1 year, essentially, from 1 year from February of next year, your micro license holders will be able to apply to the state and convert to a larger scale. And then you would go into that metric and you would pay whatever amount it would be to convert to, whether it's a 10,000, 20,000 or 50,000 square foot facility, or larger if they decide to go larger than that.
That's
So,
interesting. I mean, 2,500 is pretty small footprint.
It's very small footprint, but those, if you look, a lot of people in the industry, they all think that they can they're the best with the genealogy, they can grow the best things. Hey, you know what? Here's a footprint for you, low barrier to entry. Here's something that you can do without having to put in millions and millions of dollars. You get a large scale cultivation facility on board. I'll just say, I mean, anywhere north of $10 million in New Jersey, at least. I mean, maybe up in Maine where Connor can find one in the woods for cheaper, but in New Jersey, you're going to have a hard time being able to build and get a large scale, full scale operation for less than $10 million, I would say, off the ground. Obviously, the micro license creates a way where you can get in the door, you can show the state you're a good actor, you can show the state that you're going to comply with the rules and regulations, and then say, hey, look, I did this for a year. Now let me compete with the big boys. Now let me compete. Now I have some capital. Now I can pay you more money, state. Now I want to increase my size. So the other thing that I find is interesting is how the states, some call it processing, some call it manufacturing, some call it extraction, they all have different nomenclature for what essentially is taking the plant and utilizing the THC in some other form other than flower. So I always find that to be interesting too, Dan.
On the retail side, Nick, unlimited licenses, there's no cap. Correct?
Yes, and I see actually Nicoletta. Hi, Nicoletta. Sorry, that's one of my friends asked the question about the limited number of licenses on retail. There is not a limited number of licenses as of right now. The only thing with a cap is your large scale cultivation facilities is the only one which are going to be competitive licenses. It seems like we are adopting the model that's a little bit more closely aligned to Michigan. I'm not 100% with Massachusetts, but I know with Michigan, it's really you get the approvals from the local municipalities, and then you go to the state with your package. Now, that Jersey also has a conditional license, which we were talking about earlier, pre-call, which the conditional license is if you have less than a certain income and you wanted to go for a conditional license where you could submit what is essentially an incomplete application to the state. You get a certain period of time, I believe 180 days, to complete your application. So you get your license, and then it's a conditional license. Then you can go to a landlord and say, hey, look, I've got this conditional license. If you let me operate here, I can start paying you rent now. I'm going to be up and running soon, and they can have more comfort. Or you can go to an investor and say, hey, look, I have a conditional license. Here's basically what the rules in New Jersey say you can loan me money at. Here's what we can go up to. Can you not try to charge me 100% interest? It gives some of the smaller guys a little bit more opportunity to get their feet in the door. So,
and this. And by the way, Nick, it is very similar to Massachusetts. These applications, this annual cannabis business application is almost a carbon copy of the Massachusetts application. It's very similar.
Yeah, they looked like they copied. And you know what? Why reinvent the wheel? And I think you've seen it progress as we've moved along. Obviously, I think Colorado probably wishes that they put a little bit more restraint on it. And I would imagine that, your Washington and your Oregon probably did too, given the fact that they've almost cratered their markets because of how easy it was to get a cultivation license. Good for the consumer, but for the businesses, when you've got flour going for $400 a pound, that's not great to cover your costs.
Well, it's a mess from a regulatory perspective as well, which might not seem like a concern to the general public. That's the regulator's problem if they've created an industry that is too big for them to manage, but it could very much be a public safety problem as well. poorly regulated licensed businesses or businesses that are masquerading as legal businesses but diverting product to the black market have become a big factor in California, Oregon. Now Oklahoma is a place where we see a lot of that activity due to very low barriers to entry, and it can be a magnet for money laundering and other things as well. So there are very real risks to the system outside of cannabis that for those of us in the industry, these things can get blamed on us. They get blamed on the cannabis industry when really they're the fault of inadequate regulation in some cases.
Yeah.
So, just went over the lack of a license cap in most of these categories, except with respect to large scale cultivation. What other barriers to entry are there?
Yeah, Harry, we've been chatting along. What do you think as far as if you're starting now and want to get from a financial level? Because obviously the main thing to answer your question, Dan, and I'll loop it to him. Main thing is municipality and having what's really, I would say the three things are going to be you're getting the support of municipality and slash your location, your landlord, getting the support of the town, getting approved, making sure you have the cash, and having some kind of experienced partner, because the state's going to want to see that you have an experienced partner. So from a financial side, Harry, can you say, you made the call, you're going in, you talked to your lawyer, you've got your entity forms, you got your team set up, from a financial aspect, what are some of the things that you are advising, and how are you helping people get set up from a financial perspective?
Yeah, Nick, thank you. So I've actually read through in detail this 160-page release from the state of New Jersey, and sprinkled all throughout the 160 pages is various requirements and things that they're asking for from a financial perspective. Okay, so I've read through it once. I went back. I kind of formulated here's my key takeaways. I tend to stay in my lane as a CPA and a partner in an accounting firm. I'm focusing in mainly on what are the financial aspects. So these are some of my takeaways from the release that I think that business owners really need to be thinking about and considering. And a lot of them, by the way, because Dan asked the question about the different various license types, a lot of them are similar across the board, the same exact requirements. Yes, there's going to be different accounting for cultivator versus dispensary, but the requirements in general are kind of pervasive across all the different licenses. So let me go into a couple of my takeaways. Some of them are going to be obvious, some might not be as obvious, but first thing is your financial forecast, right? So a barrier to entry would be if you have a financial forecast, it doesn't make any sense. There's the state, Nick, you mentioned experience. If you have a forecast that doesn't make sense, the state's not going to have a lot of confidence in you. So, one thing I see, just a helpful hint, half the forecast I see do not break out pre-opening in year one. They'll have it. And just a simple helpful hint is you really want to say, here's what I expect to spend before I even get the license. Then how much am I going to spend before I open my build out? And we like to call that year zero, right? And then when you open the doors is really when you should be starting your financial forecast, showing revenues, expenses, operational costs. That's what I expect to do. So you need to have a business plan. You need to have a decent forecast. It could be 3 or 5 years. I've seen 7. I don't think 7 is necessary. I think that's important. I've seen the word record keeping throughout this document. It's like 25 times. Okay, they're very big on record keeping. So do you have an accounting software? I'd say 3/4 of startup companies are not starting with software. They're getting there eventually, but your bank statements and credit card statements and Excel sheets and things like that, you really want to get your record keeping sort of situated and organized up front. And getting an accounting software, maybe even a simple thing like QuickBooks Online is a good start for your record keeping. That's going to get you set up. You really should get your chart of accounts set up correctly, so you could properly apply 280E, because those, your QuickBooks or whatever software you use or whatever record keeping you use is going to have to be set up properly initially. So when all the data is being input, you take that information and go ahead and file your tax return correctly, and including the concept of 280E. I'm not going to assume everybody knows what 280E is. So 15 seconds or less, 280E is the federal tax law that cannabis companies need to apply when they're filing a tax return. It substantially reduces the amount of deductions you're allowed to take on your tax return. Unfortunately, we're still federally illegal, so we have to deal with the IRS looks at us as a federally illegal business. So we have to establish that. And if you're not a CPA firm that's well versed in 280E, they're not going to really be able to help you. And a lot of accounting firms are still not working in this industry. They specifically require you to have standard operating procedures documented for record keeping, your inventory management. You might think it's simple, but how are you gonna manage your inventory, count your inventory, observe it, track it? Very important. They also have they are requiring a standard operating procedure on your accounting and tax compliance. So chances are somebody who's intelligent and is going to be able to grow cannabis is probably not going to have the wherewithal to document standard operating procedures around how they plan to be compliant with accounting and tax. So again, I'm focusing on the financial aspects. I got a few more here. They also ask you to provide who are your vendor contracts. I get another funny story. I get this question a lot, Nick, and people will ask, well, I want to beef up my application, and I'd love to inform the state that you're my CPA. And my answer is the same every time. You could tell anybody you want that I'm your CPA after you retain me to be your CPA.
Yeah.
I've actually gotten wind, as has my partner Mitzi, that we found out that people have said in their applications that we are their accounting firm when they never hired us. They might have had an initial meeting with us. It went well, busy, and all of a sudden our names and our firm are being applications. I have no problem with that if we are your CPA.
Yeah.
So they do specifically ask for
in the legal space. I was just told I was a lawyer for somebody, and I would accept service for a complaint. I was like,
exactly. Yeah.
not me, not me. I don't know what this dude told you, but I don't have an engagement with this guy. I don't even know who he is.
Well, look, that kind of puffery is common in the startup space, especially, excuse me, where people are raising capital. They might want to, make the company look as good and sophisticated and as serious as possible. But if you misrepresent something as fact that is not fact on a document you submit to your state government in order to procure a license, that's procurement fraud. Right. So you got to be really careful about where you draw the line between painting the best possible picture and actual blatant misrepresentation, and that would just be one example. But I'm glad you mentioned financial records, Harry. Aside from the 280E mitigation that you mentioned, which is very important, assuming our viewers out there are successful and get into this industry, it's unless there's some government reform between now and then, that's going to be something they have to reckon with. But it's a symptom of success. So a lot of people have the attitude, we'll deal with it when we get there. Well, no, you need to deal with it now, and it's good for a lot of other reasons to have your financial house in order as well. And one big reason I want to make sure is on everybody's mind, at least a little bit, is that if you're getting into this industry today, at least to some extent, you have your eye on possibly exiting. You want to get a license or multiple licenses, and eventually you might like to sell those to a bigger company. And there's absolutely a premium for those companies that have their financial house in order, that have clean books and records. They also will have a much easier time obtaining a bank account from a company like mine, obtaining financing, and your life will be a lot easier. So if you know that that is your ultimate objective, you need to put your best foot forward today.
Absolutely. Harry, I'm sorry. You still had
I just got two last.
Hey, no. Keep going.
And you're right, Dan. I mean, whether you're an investor, whether you have an exit sale later on, or whether the state's just looking at your forecast you put in your application, everyone's gonna do due diligence on these numbers. Do they look like they're making sense? So financial records. The last two things I had that my takeaways from this, and there's so many more, but I was really trying to be, in summary, is one, there's a lot of personal financial information they're asking for from the owners. So you got to gather personal tax returns, personal W-2s, entity tax returns if filed, loans payable, loans receivable. There's a lot of financial information that you have to gather. And then on page 75, I noticed of this 160 pages, it said that every applicant's going to have to provide unaudited financial statements for the 24-month period prior to the application. Okay. Nobody knows how to do unaudited financial statements mean they're relying on the owner to submit them. I've never seen unaudited financial statements that were correct. I mean, it's so you just got to be careful with that, because it's gonna, so now not only do they want to see your forecast for the next 5 years, but they want to see any activity for the last 2 years, right? And it's got to be categorized. A lot of people are paying stuff out of their personal account and reimbursing themselves, and you put money in the account into the business. Well, was it a loan or was it equity? I don't know. Well, you're paying yourself back. Or is there a promissory note if it was a loan? You just got to cover yourself, and think about this. Now you're talking about 7 years of financial information, 2 going back, 5 going forward. And I always say this: forecasts or estimates, they don't have to be 100%. They need to be reliable and defendable. And what does that mean? You have to have some assumptions. Okay, so if you just throw numbers at the wall, it's not going to work. But if you have numbers in there and you say, I know what the growth rate's been in other states, and we think we're going to be similar to that state, and that's why my revenue is going to grow this much, and here's my head count, which is driving how I'm getting to my payroll. You need to have some substance behind where you're getting those numbers. And for the previous 2 years, they just need to be accurate and categorized correctly, which, quite frankly, most of my clients, are inexperienced in doing. So those are some of the things on the financial side. My big takeaway is record keeping.
Yeah.
Frankly.
And to your point, I mean, a lot of this is being funded by people out of their pockets, and you want to make sure, for multiple reasons, why you're properly accounting for those things. I mean, if you're just paying for stuff, I mean, shoot, even paying for your professionals, paying your lawyer, your accountant, whomever, you want to make sure that you're properly maintaining all of those records, because as Harry points out, you're going to have to present them, and you're also going to want credit for them down the road as far as what your costs were when it comes to the federal government, because right now you're not doing anything illegal.
Nick, the last thing I'm just going to add to that is I tell my clients all the time, like, what I said, your forecasts are really important for 3 reasons. Okay, 1, potential investors, they need to be accurate. They want to see forecasts that make sense. 2, the state, they're going in your application. And 3, you just nailed it, for yourself. Like, you're a business owner, like you want to know, if my business achieves the budget, the forecast that I expect, here's going to be my take home. Here's what I'm going to have to pay investors. Like, you need to know it for yourself. So they're very, very important. I agree.
It should be almost a monthly roadmap of everything that you plan on spending, everything that you plan on, receiving. It's kind of a way to map out also the operations of the business going forward.
Hey, Connor, did you say your dispensary is up and running now in Portland?
It's actually, so the doors aren't open yet. It's passed all the inspections and it's sitting there completely done, ready for the state to give the thumbs up.
I was going to congratulate you, because I know that when I saw you a month ago or a couple of weeks ago, whatever it was, you're not fully operational yet.
Yeah,
I'll have to make another trip. I'll have to make a trip.
I was just thinking that, Nick.
Portland. I hear Portland's beautiful in October.
It is.
Look, if you could FedEx me a couple of lobster rolls, that'd be great.
Hey, listen, first of all, you should get up there for a multitude of reasons that we can talk about. But let me tell everybody, if you haven't been to Portland, Maine, it is a cool little town. And I had never been there until recently. And, Connor's been hiding up there from us, hanging out. But, I always have to meet him in Boston, which, is okay. But, Portland's way cooler. My opinion. Sorry, Boston people.
That's
The
a
state
Yankees
people
fan.
love a little music from you.
Yeah, I haven't been. We got to go. Road trip. All right, we're doing a road trip. Rebecca, you can come. I see you're still on too. Connor, do you want to give us, just a couple? I know we're probably we're getting there. We have about 20 minutes left. Good, a couple best practice things that you've seen, and we can just keep chatting. I know there was actually, right before I go there, I think there was a Q&A, startups in Jersey. What should you be doing? You should be getting your LLC formed. You should be looking at your real estate, and you should be working with your municipality right now. And then all of the financial aspects that we just talked about, that stuff that you should be currently doing as well. how to hire and fire people in the cannabis
Hold
space.
on.
Sure.
One other important thing they should be doing, and this really helps with those
Oh.
financial records, opening a bank account today in the name of the entity with which you intend to apply for a license, so that you can demonstrate those 2 years of financial history that are required for that entity for the application, so that you can begin segregating costs for tax purposes. And so you have a financial history with that institution so that they continue to support you when you are licensed, not just with a bank account, but with lending and other services as well. So
I'll give Dan a plug, ABACA, Abaca, goabaca.com. They are operating in New Jersey for pre-licensed applicants right now. So, and New York too, right?
Yep.
And New York. So,
So if anybody's told you you can't put your money in the bank to start planning and retaining attorneys and accountants and consultants and doing all of the other things and incurring all the other expenditures you need to in order to get this business off the ground, well, that's not true. You absolutely can. There are at least a handful of service providers in every state that has legal cannabis that'll work with you now, and you don't need to wait until you get your license. You can establish these relationships now.
absolutely. So anyway, so back and Connor, sorry for that. I just wanted to clean up a couple of those that I saw sitting there. Hiring and firing in the cannabis industry. You can shoot me an email. There's in New Jersey, if you're referring specifically to New Jersey, everybody's going to be labor unions. There are some staffing agencies, but there are some labor unions that are going to represent a lot of people that each applicant is going to have some kind of a labor peace agreement. So there will be some labor unions where you should have a pool of applicants. New Jersey's obviously a more labor-driven state than I think Arkansas probably is.
We're one of those ironically named right to work states.
Yeah. The right to work for less. So here with the labor unions that are going to be operating, there should be a pool of workers that you can get. But feel free, shoot me an email offline. I can make some connections for you. Connor, now for third time's the charm. Some stuff that you've learned in these legal markets, seeing the nascent industries. You really just went through it in Massachusetts and up in Maine very recently. And as you mentioned, Jersey is not really diverging too far from the Massachusetts model. So what are some of your best practices that you would throw out there, or things that you've seen?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a lot more similar to Mass than it is to Maine, but I think there's some similarities in both. But so I would say, first thing is, and this almost kind of goes off what Harry was saying, it's in the rules, but have a good business plan, write a good business plan. Don't submit your application with a 3-page business plan. I know that doesn't cover everything, right? This is probably a 20 to 25, maybe 30-page business plan. And you want, for the same purposes, you want to have everything laid out. You want to show, the scorers that what you're doing before you're actually doing it. You want to create this business, before it's actually created, and show that you have the capability to execute upon this. But then also your business plan, again, is a roadmap for once you get your license and are actually moving forward. Well, now you've already laid everything out and you're following that roadmap and executing upon it, right? And that's when it gets tough. It's easier to put it on paper than it actually is to do it. So if you have that roadmap already figured out, in detail, everything, your team, your structure, your brand, your marketing, what are you competing on? Are you coming into this, are you competing on price? Are you competing on quality? Are you competing on customer experience? Figure those things out ahead of time. And it's a lot easier to then execute upon them once they're already planned out. It's obviously something you need to submit for the application as well. I would say another takeaway is the timeline. So in all of these states, the timeline gets delayed. Even though the state says that they're going to review things in time, I think they have 90 days. That's exactly what Massachusetts said. And we all know that didn't happen. It ended up being like 9 months, right? So be prepared and expect some kind of delays. Even if the state does get through things, the review on time, there's inevitable delays all over the place. And so this brings up challenges with actually, hiring a lot of times is one of them, but, basically, also planning out your budget, making sure that you have, that you're not hiring people, too early, right? if you're going to hire someone and bring them on, and the next thing you know, you're going to get stalled out for 6 months, well, you're stuck carrying their salary, or you have to, let go of them, which you obviously don't want to do. So being prepared for a delayed timeline, both on, the state side, the municipality side, or just internally, because there's so many moving pieces. There's so many things that, once you're trying to execute this business plan, if something gets pushed a week, well, that creates, a ripple effect, which then delays you by a month or 2 months. So you got to be agile, and you got to be prepared for those type of delays and things like that.
And Connor, let me just jump in real quick, because Dan touched on this before when we were talking about how small the micro license is for a cultivator would be with 2,500 square feet. To your point on delays, the deadline the date which they will allow you to convert in New Jersey to a larger scale operation, that's set. So with all of the delays that you're going to see, if you don't think you can compete with the big boys, the MSOs, or don't have access to $10 million to build 100,000 square foot facility, the micro license, you're going to have delays. You're going to see delays. Chances are by the time you get plants in the ground here, you're going to be a few months away, hopefully, from being able to petition to petition the state. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out at this point yet. They haven't given us those rules, but assuming that you're in good standing, it seems like from everything we're seeing now, you should be able to go to the state and try to get additional caps. So sometimes these delays that you're talking about, at least here in Jersey, starting small, you may be able to progress a little bit more quickly than starting large. You may have more problems getting up and running. You may see some people who get a micro license in New Jersey actually convert prior to some of these big guys who are going for these large scale facilities, because it's just, bigger facility, bigger problems, bigger delays, bigger things like that, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that creates an opportunity, yeah, for the smaller operators. And it's 24 months, for some of these new large cultivation licenses, 24 months, they will not, unless it's a conversion from medical, they're not going to be open in 24 months. I mean, that's almost a 36-month process for something of that scale. So it's going to be a real challenge, but I think that creates an opportunity for smaller operators. But also, I mean, you think about if we compare the timeline to like the Mass timeline, right? So sales started in Mass almost 3 years ago, and I still have clients who are not open yet, but are definitely going to be successful in that market, because it's a lot of this, yes, there is some first to market has some value, that type of thing, but it's also the way the industry is going. It's about having a quality offering, having a good customer experience, having the right product selection, all those things, having a good brand that people relate to, having an interesting kind of experience. All those things are becoming more and more important. So it's not too late really ever to get in, because if you have either the right location, or you have the right brand, or you have a product, a strain or something that's catching on, right? All of those things are now very very doable in this competitive market, where you can it's not always first to market anymore, right? But it brings a lot of importance on thinking through those things and being prepared, and being ready. Make sure you have focus groups to determine your brand and your marketing, things like that. Make sure you have a plan to execute on everything, and open smoothly and successfully, and not lose customers the first couple of weeks because you opened up and your sales agents are struggling to explain the products, that type of thing. So I think it's
I can't agree more. If you're not ready to open, don't open. Like get your house of cards, don't have a house of cards, get your house in order, and make sure that you have people who go into your store say that they want to come back. You don't want to have people who go in and be like, I never want to come back here.
Yeah.
It's like any other retail business. A bunch of 1-star reviews on Weedmap for a dispensary are just as bad as 1-star reviews on Yelp for a restaurant. So
And the other thing I see way too often is beautiful facility, great people, knowledgeable, not enough product. And like, so Dan, they make a good point. You can have the best dispensary and the best business plan, but if you don't have a procedure in place to make sure that you have enough inventory to support the consumers, they're going to get that negative feedback, you know, and it could be they did everything else right, but somebody went in there thinking I'm going to get X, Y, and Z, and they were all out of X, they were all out of Y, and they only have one Z left. And you're like, I came all the way here, you know, because there's only, you know, 20 in the state, and people get frustrated, and all of a sudden it's a beautiful facility, it's a great business, but not enough product. I don't like that business.
Which made it odd for me to initially with the cap on cultivators made no sense to me. I understand that there's some organizations that from the existing operators are heavily involved with that were influential there, but you know, I thought that was something that was odd to me. It didn't make much sense, but I'm hopeful, you know, knock on wood, that the micro license is going to cure a lot of those issues. Because I think if you get a lot of good quality craft growers, essentially, I liken the cannabis industry to your craft beer or your wine industry more than, you know, this industry is not, you know, let's go grab a 30 pack of Natty Light and shotgun it. You know, I mean, there is some of the, you know, giant like consumption type thing, but for the most of the consumers, it's really a tasting wine. It's a more refined type experience though, and I think what the reputation is. I do think if you can come out with that really quality product, I mean, I still think Massachusetts is behind Colorado pretty significantly when it comes to the products that are offered. I don't think that they're there on the extraction, at least from what I've seen so far. I'll have to check out your store in Portland when you open up so I can opine on Maine. But you know, I think that this market, to your point, is still evolving almost every single day. So I think that there's definitely lots of opportunities for people to get involved now. So Dan, did you have any other points that you want to touch on, or I think we're kind of chatting around.
I've got a few others, but you can move on, and I'll come back if we have time.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead? What else? What was something else you had?
All right. So a couple of things that I kind of, you know, noticed in what's going on here, and then also, you know, what I've seen. So I would say learn from other states' applications, like we talked about, right? This is a very similar application. I think a lot of the things, you know, all the, you know, the SOPs, procedures, things like that that the state of New Jersey is looking for don't need to be created from scratch, right? Those exist. Find someone who, you know, who has them, who can kind of compile all this for you. And, you know, if you're not a professional application writer, then you don't really need to spin your wheels on this stuff. You know, you want to make sure that, you know, that you have everything together, that, you know, you have a voice and you kind of are telling a story, but, you know, you can let someone else come up with all of the, you know, procedures, everything like that, and just, you know, ensure that they are compliant, you know, versus trying to write those from scratch. I would say also, when going to municipalities and working on the local side, which, you know, is a lot of times a challenge, you know, you want to assume that the people, you know, the council members or whoever it is at the municipalities, that they need to be educated on the industry. They usually are not. And usually that's what creates friction. That's what creates, you know, a tough situation to get approval. You know, don't go in there banging your chest talking about how much money you're going to make off this. I think you want to go into municipalities with, you know, more of a, you know, what can we educate you about the industry and about what we're going to do, which generally makes them a lot more comfortable, is more likely to approve you.
We had in Jersey City, Connor, initially they weren't going to allow consumption lounges, and the public basically they did have, to their credit, they had open meetings, and the public really showed up and basically said, you know, you have a lot of Section 8 housing, which is federally illegal to consume, like at least flower or vape or whatever. And people basically, you know, educated the council people on, you know, why these were necessary. It wasn't just the council people in their mind, it was like club marijuana. And, you know, the council, they didn't appreciate that, you know, for some people, there's landlords, there were going to be other restrictions that were going to prevent them from, you know, in some cases consuming medically, and other cases you consume. I mean, I'm a believer that all cannabis use is medical, at least for most. But you know, they had prohibitions, and it took the public to really educate them. And now Jersey City is like all on is all on board because they were open, they listened. Now that's not going to work everywhere, but you know, a lot of the municipalities, you know, they need to hear from people. Real quick, just to carry on that, I've done a lot of work with some small towns in Jersey, and you know what they always say to me on behalf, you know, whenever there's a new project, the only people who ever show up are the people who want to say no. So the town people, the council folks are scared. They're scared to say yes to anything because the only people who show up are the people who are like, I was here since 1927. And in 1927, we had 9,000 trees and now we're down to 8,999. So we need to make sure that we don't cut down, you know, like, and I love trees. Let's plant more trees. Great. But there is process, there is development. But if your local governments never hear anything positive about what these projects are going to be, because all they're going to hear is the naysayers and the negative, you're going to have problems getting things done. So if you are in a town and you want to have something done, and maybe you're just, you know, you want to have a local dispensary, or maybe you want to support a friend. I mean, if you see that there's going to be a meeting on cannabis in your town and you're passionate about it, go and talk and say why it's good. Because otherwise you might wind up with a restriction on a dispensary, or they might allow to have a dispensary and not have a consumption lounge, or they may say, well, we're fine with cultivation, but we're not okay with the retail operation. By the way, the one that it's wholesale and distributor, which are, to me, one transports and then one can hold inventory. So that was the difference between the two. I always combine those two for some in my head. So anyway, Connor, I think I jumped in there and then you had something else.
So I've got one more thing, kind of more generally, but that, you know, I always tell people is, you know, put your team together, start working with them early. And by your team, you know, your group of professionals, you know, obviously, well, you know, I think you need a lot of what's on this call, you know, CPA, lawyer, banking, you also need security, you also need marketing, you also need an architect, you also need, you know, engineers, things like that. Get that team together and get them in touch and get them working together even before you think they need to be, right? So maybe hold weekly calls with that core group and just make the effort to keep people updated, because what you don't want is for something to come up that needs immediate attention. And now you have a group of 7 or 8 people who've never worked together before and don't know how to communicate together and you know, get something done for you when it needs to be done, or maybe they're busy with something else. So, you know, have weekly calls with your team, just keep them updated. You know, that effort could go a long way, you know, in the end, if something comes up. So, you know, make the effort to do so. I think that's, you know, always best practices when doing, you know, any type of business startup or application, or even, you know, after that phase. So
I can't agree with that more. There's nothing more frustrating than, you know, I'm fortunate enough to do a lot of work with Harry. I've also been on the other hand where I've had to work with accountants who, you know, maybe are, you know, second guessing things and things like, you know, not necessarily in the cannabis space, but in other parts where, you know, some business owners look at it like they can have the attorneys watch the accountants and vice versa. And to me, that's not a productive way to enter to any business. Everybody needs to be aligned. Everybody needs to make decisions. Everybody, you need to all be on the same page. So I can't agree with that anymore, whether it's your consultants, whether it's your accountants, whatever your professionals are. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody needs to be on the same team. So you're all rowing the boat in one direction, because there is so much stuff and there is going to be delays. As you mentioned, there's going to be unforeseen things that pop up, and there's going to be challenges. There's going to be stress, and everybody needs to be moving positively in that same direction. There's always going to be something unforeseen that's going to cause some drama. So thanks, Connor. We're pushing up. So Dan, I'll let you jump in. I know we've touched on a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about with you. So, you know, anything else that you want to recommend, anything else you got going right now, or you want to, you're involved seeing from so many different spots around the country. You know, what would you advise some folks on the financial side?
Well, you know, I think we've heard good counsel here today. It's important to pick good partners, good professionals, good team. It's important to have your financial house in order. it's important to have a detailed plan with all of these different aspects, and you need to consider them now because that's what your competition is considering. And when you get up and running, you don't just need to consider the competitive environment today. You need to consider the competitive environment for the future as well. And so, when you're picking the technology you're going to use across your enterprise, don't just think about what capabilities there are today. Think about what you're going to need to do in the future when Visa and MasterCard allow us to run cannabis transactions on the credit card networks. If you're a dispensary or a delivery licensee, you certainly need to be setting up your technology now to enable you to process those payments in the future. So, make sure you're looking as far down the road as you can and not just what's in front of you today.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're at an hour. That was fun, guys. We'll have to do it again. Maybe one of these days we'll be able to do a full panel with all of us sitting actually in a row. We got half. It's progress. I'd like to thank you guys all for coming on. I had a lot of fun. And if anybody has questions, we'll shoot an email with our contact information out either later today or tomorrow, so that everybody has it. If anybody has questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm pretty easy to find, and I know the other folks on the call are relatively easy to find as well. Our names are all in the little boxes there, so you should get the proper spelling. I think I'm probably by far and away the most difficult one to spell, which makes me the easiest to find. If you Google Colin Yost, maybe there's a good picture of Scarlett Johansson up there. So everybody have a great day. And, it's been a pleasure speaking with for everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Thanks.